Hi, Dan. Thank you very much for joining us today. How are things in Vancouver?
Things are great, James. Thanks for having me.
Dan, Endeavour Silver's had a great 2021 with improved production at your flagship mine, Guanaceví, and the release of your feasibility study at your growth project, Taranera. And you recently announced a new acquisition in Mexico called Taranera. But before we dive into these various assets, why don't we just start with a brief overview of Endeavour Silver for those viewers who might not be familiar with the company?
Yeah, I mean, Endeavour Silver's now been around for about 15 years. Brad Cook was our founder, and he moved from the CEO role to the executive chairman role this year, actually. So I took over May 2021 in this position. I was the CFO for 14 years, so I've been around for quite a while. And we're based out of Vancouver, headquartered here, but our operations are in Mexico. We have the Guanaceví asset, as you touched on, is kind of our flagship asset we built the company off of. The Bolañitos asset, a bit more south in the state of Guanajuato, also in Mexico. And then we have some development assets, the Taranera project. We have the Parral project in the state of Chihuahua. And ultimately, yeah, we just picked up Pizzeria from SSR Mining, who are rationalizing their portfolio. So we've got a great base in Mexico. We're also based in Nevada, USA. We've got an exploration property there, and we've also got an exploration properties 4 or 5 actually down in Chile as well. So we're trying to grow, and our focus is try to get to become a senior silver producer over the next decade.
Dan, that's a great overview. And you mentioned that you have 2 producing silver mines. And in the interest of time, I just want to focus on the larger of the two, and that's Guanaceví. And consolidated silver production was 4.8 million ounces on the year, 42,000 ounces of gold, or 8.3 million ounces of silver equivalent. And this was primarily driven by this mine. And I just want to touch on what exactly you and your team did to drive this performance this year.
Yeah, I mean, this year's performance really dates back to historical years. I mean, like I say, we've been at Guanaceví now 15 years, never had more than a 2-year reserve life. Ultimately, it's kind of like pearls on a necklace. You go down that, and one of the keys for any underground mine is mine development and making sure we're staying ahead of it, and we have enough stope opens to meet production profiles. In 2017, 2018, the lower silver prices, your margins contract, your cash flow contracts, and ultimately you end up starving a little bit of the mine to try to manage your cash flow as best you can, but it impacts your longer term production. And I think we got caught with that in 2017, 2018, and made a lot of changes in 2019, started refocusing on mine development. We bought a new fleet. So all the work to 2020 and 2021 where we beat guidance at Guanaceví stems from that. And the second part to it is in 2019 of October, we signed an agreement with Frisco, one of the largest miners in Mexico, family conglomerate owned by actually Carlos Slim, to acquire some land around that, made a discovery and brought that discovery into production in 2020 and 2021. And the grades have been phenomenal and ultimately led to our beating guidance for 2020 and 2021.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize Carlos Slim was involved in the mining industry. Does he actually own any mines, or he just owns property?
No, yeah, Frisco's Mexican based. They have 5, 6 different operations across diversified, whether it's gold or copper. He's got a nice portfolio for sure.
You always want to have a little bit of gold and silver in your portfolio.
Absolutely. In the world that we live in today and with what governments do, I think it's a good spot to be. And obviously it's been throughout times a store of wealth, and gold's been a phenomenal thing. And for us, we produce about 40% of our revenue comes from gold, 60% comes from silver. So we are a silver producer, and what we're seeing in the silver space and what's happening from an industrial aspect coupled with monetary aspects of silver, we're excited where we're at, and we're excited about the properties we have coming to be able to take advantage of that.
So I just want to ask you a couple more questions on Guanaceví before we move on. But you also had higher grades this year, and your all-in sustaining costs were also lower. Can you just touch on those 2 elements, please?
Yeah, I mean, they go hand in hand. The grade ties to this El Curso concession and bringing that online in 2020. We do a reserve and resource report, but we've even improved from that reserves and resources, ultimately what we're actually mining. you always tend to be a little bit conservative when you're estimating, and I think we were conservative, and that's showing up in our production profile. And with higher grades, on a per ton basis, we're producing more ounces of silver. We've been at Guanaceví for 15 years. We know the cost structure, and when we put out guidance, ultimately what's driven our all-in sustaining costs down is the higher grade on a per ton basis. So we are starting to see some costs increase, definitely from a supply chain standpoint in 2021. The inflation that we're seeing kind of in North America and around the world, that's percolated its way into the mining space as well. So we have seen costs push up, but luckily our production profile was higher than what we planned and ultimately drove our all-in sustaining costs on a per ounce basis down.
And can we expect the same in 2022, higher production, higher grades?
Yeah, we're going to come out with guidance in the coming weeks. Ultimately, we have our reserves and our resources. I expect the grades at Guanaceví to be similar to what we had in 2021. So that would mean a similar production profile. The plant capacity is about 1,200, 1,250 tons per day, and we basically run that this year and in the past year at 2021. We expect to do the same in 2022.
Dan, let's move on to your development project, Taranera, which when it's in full production, it's going to almost double the size of your silver output. The big news in 2021 was release of the feasibility study. Why don't you take us through that, and why don't we just look at some of the primary features like net present value, internal rate of return, and also
Sure.
payback?
Yeah, no, I mean, Taranera is a game changer for our company, and ultimately completely puts us on a different profile than what we have with Guanaceví and Bolañitos. Those assets, we've been there for 15 years and 14 years respectively. They're great assets. They're steady state. They are higher cost assets just because of the length of time we're there, where we are in the deposits, et cetera, et cetera. For us, Taranera is an organic discovery we made. It's a land package we picked up in 2010 and ultimately fully owned it in 2013. Made a discovery. We've got about 86 million ounces, or sorry, 78 million ounces defined as M&I and ultimately in our mine plan at Taranera. We put that feasibility study out. It's a very robust project. At today's prices, you're looking at about 30% IRR. Net present values just shy of $300 million with a capex of about 175 million. So very bite size. We're working on a debt package today, going through due diligence with banks and ultimately use the cash that we have on our balance sheet and some debt, which we currently have zero debt on our balance sheet, to be able to bring Taranera into production. And as you say, it will double our production. But the great thing about Taranera is ultimately its cost profile. On a cash cost basis, the cash cost is about 59 cents per ounce of silver. And that's on our base case. Using prices today, you're looking at negative cash costs. All in sustaining costs, you're effectively using all the gold. We'll pay for that silver. We're thinking about $1.50 all in sustaining costs, again on a base case. If you look at today's prices, gold is that byproduct. Cash costs, all in sustaining cash costs are negative. So there's not many projects in the silver space that have come around, and this completely changes us. Takes us from a tighter margin to basically cuts our cost profile in half, because cash costs are zero and all in sustaining costs are near zero. And then, as you say, doubles our production. Taranera, first 4 years, will do about 7.5 million silver equivalent ounces per year. And over the 12-year life that we've defined, it'll average 6.5 million ounces silver equivalent per year.
And Dan, I just want to get a better understanding of the cost, the all-in sustaining cost. Why is it, or why will it be so much lower at Taranera than it will be at your other producing mines?
Fresh ore bodies, but there's a number of characteristics of why. Grade, gold is a byproduct, so the gold that we produce is coming off those costs. But even from a cost per ton standpoint, which is the main driver of our costs, those are going to be lower on a per ton standpoint because of how shallow the deposit is, how thick the deposit is. So basically at Bolañitos and even at Guanaceví, Bolañitos we run about 2 to 3 meters in thickness. Guanaceví we run about 3 to 4 meters in thickness. At Taranera, the deposit averages 5.5 meters to 6 meters in thickness. It's very shallow. There is a lot of opportunity at Taranera to depth and along strike, so we're excited about that. But just on that 12-year mine life, the thickness, the shallowness, the grades is what's going to drive that lower cost per ounce compared to our other operations.
And Dan, let's talk about the timeline associated with construction and eventually production.
Yeah, I would say most of our permits are in place. There's always permits that you have to get after you get certain permits and as the construction period goes. We're very close on that. There's minor extensions with the new feasibility study put out. We've got amendments just pushing out some boundaries where we want to run a mill pad, where we're putting a staging area, basic things. If we wanted to get construction started today, we can, and we've started certain things. The construction period is 2 years. We'll get formal construction decision from our board ultimately when we have the financing package in place. The plan is to have that done here by the end of Q1 2022. And with that financing package, we can hit the ground running. But we have already ordered mobile fleet. Some of it's arrived, some more is arriving in March. We have a ball mill already sitting near site. There's a number of things that we're doing to make sure that we meet a 2-year timeline from a construction period. If we can meet that 2-year timeline and be on time, it'll help us be on budget for that project.
And I'm sorry, remind me again what the CapEx is associated with this project?
Yeah, right now in our feasibility study, the initial CapEx is 175 million. That was spent basically linear through the 2-year construction process. I think early on, there's a lot of earthworks needs to be done, about 6 months worth of earthworks. That's going to impact how that cash goes out. But with long lead items and making it, it's generally, like I say, a linear path of 175 million over the 2 years.
Dan, that was a great overview. Let's move on now. Your latest news is the acquisition of a very large undeveloped silver project in Mexico called Pitarrilla for $70 million, and this was acquired from SSR. Why don't you just give us a brief overview of this asset and also what was the rationale for acquiring it?
Yeah, I mean, Pitarrilla, since the original discovery by Silver Standard, which turned into SSR Mining, they'd staked it and made the discovery in 2002. Ultimately, it's one of the largest undeveloped silver deposits in the world. I mean, the discovery really is fantastic. And they advanced that all the way to 2009, where they put an underground pre-feasibility study on it. And then in 2009, the silver world changed. Silver ran from 2010 to 2012 up to $50. They reconceptualized what Pitarrilla was. They saw it for all the halo effects, the oxides, the sulfides, and actually came out with the super pit. Still considered a great project, but ultimately silver came back since 2012 when they put out that feasibility study and kind of languished here in the teens and in low 20s. And ultimately their feasibility study was done at $25 silver. Fast forward another couple of years, Alistair and SSR, Silver Standard, merged, new management team, they're rationalizing their portfolio. An opportunity for us. They're focused on gold, they're focused on other areas. We're focused on silver. The Pitarrilla deposit's got 525 million ounces defined under M&I. I mean, if you compare that to what we have at Endeavour, we're close to 200 million ounces silver equivalent. So that's our gold and our silver taken into account. This is 525 million ounces of silver defined as a resource at Pitarrilla, plus lead, plus zinc, which is about half the deposit. So we're excited to be able to acquire it. We think it was a very fair purchase price on both sides. I think both sides have been very happy with the deal, very positive from our standpoint, from our shareholders. I think it's been positive from theirs. They are going to be a 5% shareholder. They're taking some shares in the deal, but we're excited. And we've got a lot of exploration to do. We're going to prove up the resource. So we've got some to make it a current resource under Canadian guidelines under 43-101. But we expect to have that done in 2022, and then we'll put an economic study on it for 2023.
So your development team's going to be very busy going between Taranera and also Pitarrilla. How are they going to balance that time?
Yeah, they are going to be busy, and that's a phenomenal problem to have. And ultimately, Taranera and our development team, that's our focus for the next 2 years. They will focus on developing that. Our exploration team will focus on Pitarrilla. Especially for 2022, when we get into the economic studies, we can move some of our engineers over from Taranera to Pitarrilla, but we'll also use external consultants primarily on a feasibility study or a pre-feasibility study, depending on where we're at and what stage we're at with Pitarrilla. So it shouldn't take any focus away from Taranera, but ultimately with Pitarrilla, we've got to let the geology and figure out what our resource is and look at those numbers. Then we'll look at different scales of production. And ultimately, Endeavour's an underground miner. We're not open pit. The way we see Pitarrilla coming out will probably be an underground mine, but that's yet to be determined. We'll figure out the resource, put it in the hands of the engineers, see what the studies say, and then go forward from that.
Dan, as you mentioned, the asset was acquired from SSR. What will you and your team do differently than what they did?
Yeah, to be honest, I think they've done a great job defining that resource. I mean, because it is dated, it's 2012, we will make it a current resource. For them, it just became a rationalization of their portfolio, their focus on gold. They made a pivot. There's a reason why they used to be called Silver Standard. They changed their name to SSR. They picked up a lot of gold assets, and there's only a handful of us primary silver producers out there. A lot of the silver producers moved into gold over the last 10 years, and we've stayed on the silver path, partly because of our discovery of Taranera, partly because we believe in that metal over the next couple decades. So it's not that we're going to do anything different. It's just something that makes sense in our portfolio compared to their portfolio, and we think we can advance it, and we're going to reconceptualize some of the things the previous management team at SSR Mining did, and ultimately we think it's going to work out very well for our shareholders.
That's a great overview. Thank you. You recently came out with your Q4 production numbers and full year numbers for 2021.
Yeah.
And you made mention of the fact that you sold 1.4 million ounces of silver, 8,700 ounces of gold, but you also held back some silver and some gold. Is this something you do often, and what was the rationale for doing this?
We do it time to time. I mean, it's just based on what we're seeing in the marketplace, what's happening in the silver price or gold price at any given time. And we've held back silver for most of 2021. Actually, we held back some in Q2, more in Q3, and kind of kept that same level here at the end of the year. And ultimately, it's the believing in the silver price. We have a very healthy balance sheet at this point in time. We don't have any long-term debt. We have over $100 million in cash at September 30th. We had this bullion that's worth about $30 million. Working capital was over $150 million. So we had the benefit of our balance sheet to be able to make these decisions when we can and cannot sell our metal. Now, with the acquisition of Pitarrilla and the build of Taranera coming, we're going to sell that metal, but we do expect to sell it in a higher price environment than what we finished the year at. And that's just our belief in silver over the short term and ultimately over the long term. But it's just a management strategy over a short period of time. We don't like to sell into a falling market and ultimately like to see a base and it come back. The ebbs and flows of the metals market is what we're trying to take advantage of.
Dan, as we wrap up, you made mention of the fact that there's very few silver companies now, and you made mention of the fact that SSR used to be Silver Standard. I totally forgot about that company. And now they're focused on gold. But why do you think that is? Why are so few companies focused on silver and more of these, what used to be silver companies, are focusing more on gold?
Yeah, a couple factors I think go into it. One's the scarcity of silver projects and primary silver projects. If you look at silver production in the world, we produce somewhere about 800 million ounces, peaked at 1 billion ounces per year. Only 30% of that production comes from a primary silver mine. To get scale and once you get to a certain size of silver, it's how do you replace that production and maintain the profile and growth of a company. And I mean, we're all taught through years of experience and some of us through school that growth is a good thing and you always want to provide growth. That means that you're moving forward, and sometimes you get stuck if you can't find a silver asset to replace ounces you previously produced. You start looking at gold assets, and I mean, gold and silver are nice fits together. There's monetary aspects to it and often found in the same deposit. So I think mostly it has to do with what's the next evolution of the company, how do you continue to grow, and sometimes it comes down to patience and finding that right project in the right jurisdiction, and other times it's management just wants to pivot and they see an opportunity. And opportunities sometimes in geology, you're looking for silver and you end up with a different metal, or gold and you end up with a different metal, and that might change that path of those companies. But I think it really comes down to the scarcity of silver deposits in the world.
Dan, that's a great overview. As we wrap up, what can investors expect in terms of news flow from Endeavour Silver in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, a lot's happening obviously with this acquisition. We've got lots happening in the company. We do have our other exploration assets. We have Parel. We put out drill results there in December. We'll have more drilling here in 2022 and expect to have results coming out at Guanaceví, Bolañitos, and Parel when it comes to exploration. again at Taranera. I think the key drivers though coming up is the financing package for Taranera and the formal construction decision before the quarter's out. We will put out guidance for 2022. We generally do that at the end of January. And then it's normal operations, and we'll continue to look from an M&A standpoint what we can put into our portfolio that makes sense to add value for our shareholders.
Dan, thank you very much for that update on Endeavour Silver. And to all of our viewers, if you have any questions for Dan and his team, please send us an email to info@bloorstreetcapital.com, and we'll make sure you get an answer to your questions. Or if you would like some research on Endeavour Silver, send us an email and we'll send it along. Once again, Dan, thank you.
Thanks, James.